Today, we're going to take a fascinating, up-close look at the absolute marvel of biological engineering that is keeping you alive right this very second. We are going on a microscopic factory tour of the cell. If you've ever wondered how the actual building blocks of life operate day to day, well, you're in the right place. Okay, let's dive into this.
To start us off, I want you to think about a question. What do all living organisms actually have in common? I mean, whether you're looking at a towering redwood tree outside, your pet dog, or a microscopic organism swimming in a single drop of pond water, they all share a fundamental baseline. They are all made of cells. Cells are literally the smallest living units of an organism. Think of them as tiny, bustling, microscopic factories that manufacture the components of life itself.
So, here's our roadmap for this explainer. We'll start with the universal traits of cells, look at the difference between eukaryotes and prokaryotes, walk through the cellular assembly line, check out power, storage, and cleanup, and finally, look at cell shape and movement.
All right, Section 1, Universal Traits of Cells.
Now, no matter what type of cell we're talking about, every single one of them shares three foundational components. First up, the cell membrane. You can think of this as the factory walls and the security gate. It strictly separates the inside of the cell from the outside environment. Inside those walls, you've got the cytoplasm, which is this jelly-like fluid that fills up the cell and gives everything a nice suspended place to float. And finally, we have DNA. This is the cell's genetic material. It's essentially the ultimate blueprint and master instruction manual for absolutely everything the cell does.
Moving right along to Section 2, Eukaryotic versus Prokaryotic cells.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the defining line between these two broad categories of cells, and that line is the nucleus. On the left, we have eukaryotic cells. These are the advanced, highly complex cells that make up plants and animals. Yes, that includes you and me. They have their genetic material securely enclosed in a nucleus, and they contain other specialized membrane-enclosed structures. Now, on the right, look at the prokaryotic cells. These are simple one-celled organisms, like bacteria. They definitely still have genetic material, but it's completely free-floating. It's not contained within a nucleus, and they completely lack those other membrane-enclosed structures. I just mentioned that eukaryotic cells contain other membrane-enclosed structures, and scientists call those organelles. Let's quickly define that. Organelle literally translates to little organ. So just like your body has a heart, lungs, and a stomach to do very specific jobs, a cell has these specialized parts that have unique, vital jobs to perform just to keep the whole operation running smoothly.
Okay, Section 3, the cellular assembly line. We're stepping onto the factory floor now. So, how are things actually made here? Well, everything starts at the control center, the nucleus. Inside the nuclear membrane, the DNA usually just sits there in a tangled, spread-out form called chromatin, though, side note, it does condense into distinct chromosomes when the cell is ready to divide. But mostly, this DNA is busy dictating exactly what the cell is going to do. Inside that nucleus is a smaller, dense structure called the nucleolus, and its job is to manufacture ribosomes. Now for step 3. Those newly made ribosomes leave the nucleus, float out into the cytoplasm, and get right to work synthesizing or making proteins. Step 4. These proteins move into a membrane-enclosed passageway called the endoplasmic reticulum, or ER for short, for transport. And finally, step 5. They emerge in tiny little vesicles and arrive at the Golgi apparatus, sometimes called the Golgi body. Here, the proteins are fully customized. The Golgi folds them into usable shapes or maybe adds materials like lipids or carbohydrates, perfectly packaging them for the cell to use. It really is a literal microscopic assembly line.
Real quick, I want to clarify something about that transport system we just talked about, the endoplasmic reticulum. There are actually two distinct types of ER inside our factory. The rough ER actually has ribosomes attached directly to its surface, which gives it this bumpy, rough look under a microscope. The smooth ER, as you can probably guess, simply doesn't have those ribosomes attached. Easy enough, right?
All right, let's look at Section 4, power, storage, and cleanup.
Let's talk about power. You have almost certainly heard the famous phrase, the mitochondrion is the powerhouse of the cell. But how does it actually do that? Well, through a process called cellular respiration, the mitochondria create ATP molecules, and these ATP molecules provide the vital energy for absolutely all of the cell's activities. Here's a super fascinating detail. It's a strict supply and demand system. So, for example, your highly active muscle cells have significantly more mitochondria in them than, say, your skin cells, just to keep up with the heavier workload.
Next up, we have our waste and storage departments. Any active factory is going to produce waste, right?
Well, in animal cells, you'll find organelles called lysosomes. These are the dedicated garbage collectors. They literally take in damaged or worn-out cell parts and use special enzymes to break down this cellular debris so it doesn't clutter up the cell. Now, for storage, the cell uses vacuoles. These are sac-like structures that store various materials. A really great example of this is in plant cells, which feature a massive, single central vacuole specifically dedicated to storing water.
And hey, speaking of plants, we need to introduce a specific term here: photoautotrophic. This refers to organisms, like plants, that literally capture sunlight to create their own energy. And because they do this, their cellular factories require some highly specialized equipment that our animal cells just don't need.
So let's compare them. A crucial point here is that both animal and plant cells rely on mitochondria for cellular respiration. They both have them. But plants have some exclusive extra equipment. Only plant cells have chloroplasts. This is where photosynthesis actually happens. They also have a rigid cell wall located right outside the cell membrane for extra structural support. Oh, and those chloroplasts? They contain a green pigment called chlorophyll, which is exactly why plants are green.
Finally, Section 5, Cell Shape and Movement.
Deep inside the cytoplasm, the cell maintains its shape through a complex scaffolding known as the cytoskeleton. And this skeleton is made up of two main components. First, you have the microfilaments, which are these thread-like structures made of protein. Second, you have the microtubules, which are very thin, hollow tubes. Together, this essential scaffolding provides the structural framework that keeps the cell from just collapsing into a totally formless puddle of jelly. To wrap up our tour, there are some really unique structures that only certain cells have, specifically designed for movement. Cilia are these microscopic hair-like projections that can actually move in synchronized waves. For example, the cells lining your human respiratory tract are covered in cilia. They wave back and forth to trap inhaled particles and then expel them when you cough. On the other hand, some cells have flagella. A flagellum is essentially a little tail that helps a cell propel itself forward. A lot of bacteria use these, and the only human cell that features a flagellum is a sperm cell. And this brilliantly illustrates how microscopic cellular anatomy translates directly into the macroscopic, everyday functions of the human body. So, we've covered the universal traits, the advanced eukaryotic assembly lines, the mighty powerhouses, and the structural skeletons of the cell. I want to leave you with a final thought to chew on. Considering the billions upon billions of these incredibly complex factories operating perfectly inside of you right now, reading DNA, synthesizing proteins, and generating the energy you're using to listen to this, how does this change the way you view your own body? It really is an absolute marvel of nature. Thank you so much for joining me on this microscopic tour.